Her wrists ached as the metal tightened, cold steel biting against bare skin. A circle of strangers' eyes burned into her, some with curiosity, some with quiet judgment, none daring to speak. The officer's hand pressed firmly on her shoulder, as if she were a criminal, as if her existence alone warranted suspicion. She had not even been asked her name. The humiliation was immediate and raw. In broad daylight, outside a quiet grocery store, a woman stood in handcuffs without explanation. People passed, whispering, recording, pretending not to care. The officers treated her with the detached efficiency of paperwork. One more body to subdue, one more problem to shuffle through the system. She lowered her eyes, not from guilt but from dignity, her silence an act of resistance sharper than any words. She did not tremble, she did not plead. She simply stood there, her breathing even, her gaze distant. If anything, the officer's impatience seemed to swell in the face of her calm. One snapped at her to speak, to justify herself, to give them something to file away. She offered nothing. Behind the quiet composure, there was a life carved from sacrifice. Years of service had engraved a discipline in her bones that no badge, no cuffs could strip away. She had worn a different uniform once, one made not of authority but of duty, soaked in desert dust and memories that never faded. She had stood in places where silence was survival, where speaking out meant giving away a position, where calm under pressure separated life from death. The scent of sand, gunpowder, and distant fire sometimes returned in flashes, but she never let it own her. She had already given too much to fear. Her name was Claire Matthews, though no one had cared to ask. Once she was Sergeant Matthews, an army medic who had patched wounds under fire, who had carried brothers in arms across scorching ground, who had written letters home for men who would never hold a pen again. Her husband, Daniel, had met her when she returned from her second deployment. He knew her strength, but he also knew the quiet scars she carried. And today, as she stood cuffed without cause, the strength and scars collided in a storm no one around her could yet see. Claire's backstory was not the kind written in newspapers. It was whispered in the halls of VA hospitals, in the weary looks of veterans waiting for care. She had lost more than comrades overseas. She had lost sleep to the ghosts of battle, lost innocence to the sight of children wandering in war-torn streets, lost faith in easy answers. Yet she also gained an unshakable sense of right and wrong, a compass sharpened by sacrifice. She believed respect was not a courtesy, but a duty owed to every person, something she had sworn to uphold in the dust of foreign soil. Now, standing on cracked pavement under the bright sun, she faced not enemy fire, but the cold indifference of the system she once defended. The officers cuffing her did not know her history. To them, she was only a figure resisting instructions. To them, silence was defiance, not strength. They wanted submission. She offered none. A small crowd formed. Some lifted phones to record, their faces half hidden behind glowing screens. Others muttered to one another, some condemning her without knowing, others uncomfortable with what they witnessed, yet too afraid to intervene. The silence of the bystanders cut deeper than the weight of the cuffs. Claire's dignity was not just being tested by authority. It was being abandoned by community. She remained motionless, hands bound, posture steady. A quiet storm lived behind her eyes. She had once whispered to dying soldiers that everything would be okay, even when she knew it was a lie. Now she whispered only to herself, patience, endurance. Truth reveals itself in time. The officers, frustrated by her composure, began to search her belongings without consent. The indignity was sharp, but Claire did not flinch. Among her belongings was a small, worn wallet containing a photograph. Her husband in uniform beside her, both of them younger, eyes bright with the naive hope of a safer future. The photo slipped to the ground as the officers rifled through. A stranger noticed but said nothing. Silence again. Claire's only action came when she was finally granted the smallest allowance. One call. The officer placed a phone in her cuffed hands with irritation, expecting perhaps a tearful plea to family, an apologetic voice seeking rescue. But Claire's voice, when it came, was calm, steady, deliberate. She called Daniel. She spoke no details. She did not have to. Daniel Matthews was not only her husband, he was a decorated officer who had transitioned from military service into a federal investigative role, deeply connected within the very networks that oversaw law enforcement conduct. When he answered, her silence spoke louder than words. A pause, a steady breath, the restraint in her tone, all told him what had happened. Within the hour, the machinery of internal affairs was in motion. Calls traveled faster than the officers at the scene could comprehend. A name whispered in the right ear. A record pulled up on a government screen. A realization dawning that the woman they had humiliated was not only innocent, but revered among those who still respected sacrifice. The officer's confidence began to erode. One received a call mid-procedure, his tone shifting from authority to nervous compliance. Another stepped aside, suddenly uncertain, his earlier bark reduced to silence. The same public that had stared passively now sensed the change, their curiosity sharpening. The power dynamic shifted in the air, invisible but undeniable. Claire had not moved an inch, but the ground beneath them all seemed to tilt. They had restrained a woman who once saved lives under fire without even asking her name. Authority had not just overstepped, it had trampled dignity in front of witnesses. One by one, the officer's bravado crumbled. The cuffs came off, the steel clicking open, as if conceding defeat. The photograph, retrieved from the pavement, was placed back into her wallet with shaking hands. But no apology yet came. The silence was heavy. Claire stood tall, her wrists marked red but her eyes unwavering. Finally, one officer mumbled a justification, a hollow excuse that dissolved in the air before it reached her. She did not respond. Her silence was louder than any accusation. Her dignity was intact, untouchable. A line settled in the minds of everyone who watched. Strength does not always raise its voice. Sometimes it stands still while the world realizes its mistake. Another truth lingered in the atmosphere, unspoken but felt. Respect should never depend on recognition. Asking a name is the first act of humanity. They had failed even that. Claire turned without ceremony, walking toward her car as if nothing had happened. But in the shadows, the ripples of her restraint grew. Internal Affairs had already opened an inquiry. Officers who once smirked with superiority now faced investigations that could end careers. Public pressure swelled as the video taken by bystanders spread online. Not just a video of officers cuffing a woman, but of their faces shifting when her truth came to light. Days later, the officers involved sat under harsh lights in a sterile room, answering questions not with authority but with shame. Internal Affairs demanded explanations for every step, every word, every failure of respect. Daniel's presence in the process ensured it would not be swept aside. Their silence now was not dignity but fear. For Claire, the resolution was not about revenge. She did not need their careers to end, nor their apologies to heal. What mattered was that truth had surfaced. Her silence had forced it. The power of unshakable composure had revealed the weakness of arrogance. In the weeks that followed, the video inspired debates, conversations in households and public forums. People quoted her restraint, her silence, her calm. They repeated lines whispered in the retellings. That strength does not always shout, that dignity is louder than humiliation, that respect begins with a name. When she walked through her neighborhood afterward, strangers greeted her differently. Not with pity, but with quiet respect. Some stood a little taller when she passed. Some nodded silently, acknowledging what she had endured and how she endured it. Her story spread not because of confrontation, but because of resolution. The image that lingered most in people's minds was not the handcuffs, nor the officer's nervous retreat, but the sight of a woman standing silently unbroken, her honor untouched. And in that silence, a lesson echoed that unseen battles are often the hardest, that respect is owed long before titles or records are revealed, and that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that chooses not to speak. So as you hear this story, ask yourself, what does respect mean where you live? What silent heroes walk past you each day, unrecognized, unasked, unseen? Share where you're listening from. Share what this story means to you. And if you believe dignity deserves a voice, then stay with us for more stories that honor those who fight unseen battles with unshakable strength.